All right. Well, it's top of the hour here, so I guess I'm going to get started. Hey, everyone. April Dunnam here. Thanks for joining me for the last session here of the day. Really appreciate you sticking around to the very end. So I'm here to talk about Power Apps Makeover Basic to Beautiful. And of course, I'm sure you've seen this quite a bit since this is towards the end of the conference here, but don't forget about the 2021 in-person events coming up in June and December. And of course, thank you to all of our sponsors. This wouldn't be possible without them. So a little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know me. My name is April Dunnam. I'm a partner technical architect here at Microsoft. I've been here about a year now, actually. It'll be a year in just a couple of days here. Before joining Microsoft, I had my own consulting company, and I was an MVP in the business app space. And I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. I am an active blogger, so you can check out my blog, sharepointsiren.com. And I'm an active YouTuber, so if you go to YouTube and just search for April Dunnam, you should find all of my videos. And I have lots of variety from, of course, lots of Power App stuff, Power Automate, Teams, and SharePoint. All right, so the agenda for what I wanted to cover in my time here with you all. First, I want to kind of go a high level, what makes an app beautiful? Then we're going to go over some tips to make over your apps. I'm going to do quite a bit of demos and going to point you to some resources, and then I'm going to save time at the end for some Q&A. Right? So if that sounds good, let's just dive right in. So kind of just a visual representation of what I'm wanting to talk about today is the art of the possible and how you can take something kind of basic like this, like say you've went into Power Apps and you've had it create the app for you, saying start from a data source, and you have your basic 3-screen application that's functional, but maybe not the most wow factor, right? Or the most visually appealing application. So I want to show you how you can go from something basic like that to, the same basic concept, but it just looks way better, right? So what are some tips and tricks that we can do to make your app beautiful like we see here? So starting with what actually makes a beautiful app. So to kind of represent this, I have a pyramid up here. So the foundation of a beautiful application is an app that's performant, right? So I know this is kind of about beautiful applications, and you probably assume this is all about UI, which most of it is, but it's really important to not neglect performance, because you could have the most beautiful and intuitive application, but if it's really slow to load and laggy and just slow to use in general, then your users aren't going to want to use it and they're going to abandon it. So we can't neglect performance, and that's why it's the foundation of what makes an app beautiful. Then a beautiful app is intuitive, right? So this is all about that user experience. Does it make sense, right? We don't want to have to make our users go out and get a master's degree in how to use our application. It should just make sense and flow nicely. And then finally, the icing on the cake, right? If we have a really nice performant application, it's intuitive for our end users. Now, if we make it easy on the eyes, right? If it matches our company brand standard, the colors flow nicely, the font typography is nice, that's really the icing on the cake. And if you happen to notice, I like acronyms, so that spells out PI. So everyone loves PI, right? So we all love beautiful applications. All right, so we're going to use this here as the foundation of how we're going to break out the things that we're talking about today. Now, I know performance can be a little bit boring, so I'm saving that towards the end, and we'll go over some tips for performance. We'll start actually with the intuitive and easy on the eyes factors, right? How can we add some wow factors into our apps? But first, before we dive into specific tips with that, how do we even get started thinking about building an app and building beautiful applications, right? So first two things that I want you to do is, one, know your problem and your audience, because if you're building an application, you can add all these bells and whistles, but you need to know the problem you're trying to solve first and your audience so that you can target and design the application and optimize that best for your users. I love this Dilbert comic here about, I can't start the project because the user won't give me his requirements. The boss says, start making something anyway, otherwise we'll look unhelpful. So our plan is to cleverly hide our competence, right? That's just pretty funny. But we have to start with why. Clearly define the problem that you're trying to solve. then we need to ask ourselves where. Where will our users that are going to be using this application be using this? Are they going to be primarily inside or outside? Because if they're outside in the sun all day using your application, maybe you need some kind of dark mode or some additional requirements for the app. Or maybe they're in a Wi-Fi hotspot, but maybe they could be in a dead zone where they don't have internet access. Then that means maybe you need to add in some offline integration into your app. You also need to consider how they'll be accessing it. Is it going to be on a PC, a tablet, or a phone? So that's going to kind of tell you what optimizations you need to make to your app from that end. And are there any integrations? Do users want to be able to easily pull up your app from SharePoint or from Teams? So it's going to tell you more about where and what integrations you need. And then who. So this is really important, like what geographies will people be using this in? Do we need to have a multilingual application perhaps? Are there any accessibility issues? Now we should even have to ask ourselves, are there any? We should just be designing with accessibility in mind. So people with vision impairments and hearing impairments. Now, once we know our problem and our audience, and we've got all of those questions answered, the next step is to get inspired. So one of the things that I know that I struggle with, so I'm a developer, but I'm not like a graphic designer. So it's something that I typically struggle with is how do I build a good UI? One of the things that I found helpful is to go and get inspiration from other sources. So for Power Apps specifically, a good source are these Microsoft Power Apps templates that are out there and free to use. So if you go to make.powerapps.com, you might have noticed that there's templates out there for different things like time off and expense reporting. So those are a great place to start to just get a feel for what do nice looking Power Apps in general look like. There's also other ones outside of the Power Apps portal itself that Microsoft and others have developed that you can use for inspiration as well. One of the recent ones is the crisis communication application, which is a nice app that Microsoft developed and released to help manage communications in this times with the pandemic and everything. There's also the Power Users community, and you'll hear me talk about that a lot today. So that's a great resource, not only to get help if you're facing issues, but there's lots of community app samples out there that you can use to get inspiration from as well. There's also the Microsoft Employee Experience Starter Kit, which is what you're seeing in the screenshot there. There's lots of great design tips and tricks that you can get from that one. So it's actually a set of several different applications in there that you can kind of steal some ideas from. Now that's just all from the Power Apps site itself, but I don't want you to limit yourself to getting design inspiration only from other Power Apps examples, because really Power Apps is just a mobile or web application, so you can get inspiration from other ones. So some things that I think of, for example, like if I'm building a timesheet application, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at other timesheet apps and see how they're building their UI. And I'll show one here in a little bit that I built, and you see that I've kind of borrowed a lot of the UI from QuickBooks because I use that to track time. I'm familiar with it, and I think the UI is pretty well laid out. So that's a good use case, to get ideas from apps you're already using with similar type use cases. I also really like Pinterest. So there's Pinterest boards just for app inspiration that you can check out also. That's really good. So just this is one particular that I like that I keep an eye on that you might want to check out. And then finally, Power Addicts. So if you're active on Twitter at all, you can search for the hashtag Power Addicts. And there's lots of people in the community that are tweeting out, images and samples of different apps that they're working on in Power Apps for you to get ideas also. So we've got our requirements. Maybe you've got some basic inspiration of how you want to lay out your app. Now we need to get more into the weeds of, well, how can we make sure that we're building an app that's going to be intuitive? One of the number one things that I point out, for basic concepts for making intuitive applications is to what I call Marie Kondo your apps. And really what I mean by that is Marie Kondo is all about reducing clutter. And if it doesn't spark joy, get rid of it, right? Just keep the necessities. So we need to take that same basic concept into the apps that we're building, because clutter is really the enemy of good design. If you look at examples of well-designed applications and not so well-designed apps, The not so well-designed ones typically tend to have way too much information on the screen, and that's just going to overwhelm your users and just really affect their cognitive load and going to give them too much to look at. So we want to keep it as simple as possible and only show the necessary items on a given screen for our users. So what are some ways that we can do that? Well, if you look at the screenshot that we have here, this particular sample for the Kudos application is using a lot of these good concepts. So for one, we're not bogging down the users with a bunch of information here in the navigation. We have that hidden with a hamburger menu. So we can use that and click on it and see additional areas where we can navigate to. Another, we're not bogging down with other navigation items because we have a nice clean footer here so we can navigate back and forth. And we're only seeing like the Kudos received. We have other pages or screens in the app where we can see Kudos to me. You see they're using tabs, so we can tab over to see Kudos that I've given and Kudos that I've received, right? So we're not just trying to infinitely scroll and see those all on one single screen. So tabs, pop-out menus, visuals are great ways to help really declutter the applications that you're building. And we'll see some examples of this as I switch to the demo here in a little bit. Okay, next thing I want you to do is to remember your ABCs. And what I mean by that is always be communicating. So one of the most important things that we can do here that's going to really give your users a sense of that warm, fuzzy feeling when they're using your app is to make sure they're aware when they do things right or they do things wrong. So, if they submit something, right, you want to give them a success message because you don't want to have a call from your users saying, well, I submitted this, but I don't know, did it actually work because it just routed me back to the home page and didn't give me a message, right? So we don't want to, confuse our users and have them left wondering if something worked or not. So along those same lines, if there is an error, we want to make sure that we're surfacing those errors up and being just as descriptive as we can about that. So success and error messages, and then also loading messages. So there are times where, obviously we want to always be thinking about performance and the ways that we can optimize our apps. But there's going to be some things that we can't get past performance-wise, and there might take a little long to run. So in that instance, just showing a simple animated loading GIF to your users, just letting them know that something's working, goes a long way to, again, give them that warm, fuzzy feeling that it's working. They just need to have a little patience, right? Next big tip, HTML control. So when we look at Power Apps, we have all of these out-of-the-box controls we can use, right? We can put in labels, rectangle controls, and text boxes and all of that, but you're really kind of limited as far as how you can style those controls. There's a few out-of-the-box options, but you can't go too crazy. In those instances, when you want to do a little bit more with the styling of things, we're able to use this HTML control. And as the name implies, it's going to allow us to inject HTML into our Power Apps. So things that you couldn't traditionally do inside of Power Apps, like box shadows, text shadows, gradients, things like that, gives you more flexibility. And you can have and inject HTML and inline CSS with this. This isn't a tool that's going to let you inject JavaScript, so it's just going to be your HTML and inline CSS, but it's really going to give you more flexibility there. And if you don't know HTML, there are tools out there like HTML Online that we have linked here that will help you kind of produce HTML for you. So it's kind of like a visual editor that you can go in and say you want like a box shadow, and it will produce the HTML, and you can just copy and paste that in. So that's really useful. And this screenshot here, we're using quite a bit of the HTML control in this. So you see how we have like the vacation days and the floating days, and that's has like nice gradient effect there. And it's kind of rounded like that, and it has the box shadows and everything. That's all done with that HTML control. I do have a video on my YouTube as well, kind of listing the top 3 use cases that I call for this HTML control. So it goes beyond just styling. You can actually use this HTML control as well to produce a PDF output that you can pass to Flow so that, or Power Automate, so that you can print this out, stuff in your Power App. So lots of kind of unique use cases for the HTML control. And with that, now's a good time probably to segue over, and we'll just look at some demos about and see how we can use some of this stuff. Okay, and bear with me because my computer is being a little bit slow and it goes back and forth between the presentation and Power Apps here. So with the HTML control, we can see I have this HTML CSS tips and tricks. So it's really simple to use. All we have to do is go to Insert, Text, and HTML Text, right? So it's going to give us the HTML control, and it's going to pre-populate it down here with some sample text. So you can see we have the ability, like we have a bold tag there and just some text in there. So we're going to wrap all of our text within quotes. Now, one of the things you'll see that I already did up here is I've used this HTML control, and I just put a really simple one line of HTML to get this nice gradient effect here. So we have this kind of rectangular object here, circular thing with the gradient, and all it is just some box shadows in the HTML. So I just used that site to produce the HTML for me, pasted it in here, and now I have this great HTML. And one of the cool things about this is you can mix and match it with other elements. So, you know, that screenshot that we saw just a second ago of that time off app, you know, we can inject, say, a label over this if we wanted to, so that we can show some information like 8, maybe we would have 8 vacation days, right? We can kind of use this HTML if we want just as a background and layer some text over that, right? Or we could manually inject text from our application in the HTML. So that this is one way, so I have a label. The other way is I can go into the HTML, and within this, I can put that in quotes there. I can do 2 ampersands. And now I can take information within this HTML block from my Power App and inject it in here. So I just added that label control. So I think it was label 4. So I can get its text value. And now when I do that, you see it layers the text within that div, that HTML element. So a really powerful way to add extra effects to your application. You can see other things that we can do here is the boxes and the box shadows. So this is good to kind of make your own buttons that look a little bit better than the out of the box. So this is an out of the box Power Apps button that we have here. So not much we can do, as you see. Like we can change the color in the border, and we can adjust the border radius, meaning like is it square, or if I change that, it goes to circular. So it can kind of make it look like that. But we can't do things like a gradient effect on this, or this box shadow that you kind of see. Let me zoom in a bit here. But you see it kind of has that nice shadow effect there. So that's something we wouldn't be able to do out of the box, and the HTML control kind of gives us that ability to do. All right. So another way that I'm using the HTML control is in this application. So in this one app, I'm kind of using a lot of the concepts that I talked about. So one, you know, reducing clutter, recondoing our apps. And one way I'm doing that is with the tabs that you see at the bottom. So to move back and forth between this application, I have this footer at the bottom that's standard across all of my screens so that I can navigate back and forth. On this home screen, I'm actually using that HTML control for this section here. Another tip, bonus tip that I'm doing is I'm using images to make my app look a little bit more visually appealing. So, you know, for example, I could have had this all kind of in this muted gray color, but just having this, you know, picture of the office and a computer and all of that just makes it look a little bit better. So I'm using an HTML control for this little background area here. And the overall concept of the app is I can book a desk so that I can maintain social distancing for a day in an office. So I can go to the book tab, and that's going to take me again. So I'm not asking for a bunch of information here. I'm just showing a nice big calendar control where I can select a date that I would want to, you know, book a desk from, and it could be one date or multiple. And then I'm just asking for a time slot, you know, so I have these simple to use drop downs. If maybe I just want it from 1 to 5, I can continue. The next screen is just going to show me the desk that I have available so that I can, click a little information icon. Another bonus tip, so I'm just kind of throwing a lot of bonus tips at you as I move along here, is tooltips. So this is something that we're able to do in our app. So we can have this little information icon, but when we hover over it, we can give some more context to the users of what that actually is. If we click this, we're going to view details. So I can click it and I can see like a map of the area so I can see where the desk is. So this is another concept that I'm using of dialogues, right? So we can have a little dialogue pop up where I click that. The background is kind of muted. The picture is in the forward and we have an X to close out of that dialogue. And then I can select one of these desks, continue. Then I just get a nice confirmation screen. Again, what was the other thing that I said? It was always be communicating with your users. So I'm communicating and having them confirm that this is what you selected. Does it look right? And then now when they actually confirm, we're going to show them a success message that you're successfully booked. And now you notice I didn't click anything. My hands were away from the screen. It automatically routed them back to the home page, right? So I gave them a success message, but then I didn't have to make them have any unnecessary clicks. I just moved them right back to the dashboard so that they can confirm and see their reservation history and then even go back and book another one, right? So lots of those concepts for, building beautiful apps and intuitive applications in this one app. So if we just open this in edit mode here, let's take a look at how I did some of these things. And while this is loading, I'll take a look at the chat. Cool, okay, so no questions yet. Yeah, feel free to, if you have any questions that come along the way, just put those in the chat there. And as I have pauses like this, I'll try to answer them as much as I can. And of course, we'll have time at the end also. Okay. So first thing we'll look at is how we did that dialogue. So that was here on our desk select screen. So this is a pretty simple, basic concept. I started out by in here, this is actually a gallery control that we're storing this information in for the desk. So I just went into the gallery control and I went to insert icons. And there's a little icon for information in here. So I just selected that one and put that in there. And I won't bore you with scrolling through all of this, but trust me, it's in there. So now that I have the icon, this is what I'm going to use to facilitate the opening of my dialogue. And there's no dialogue control in here. We have to build it ourselves. So what my dialogue is going to consist of is, let's take a look here, is this right here. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm utilizing the fact that Power Apps lets us group multiple controls together. So if I expand this out, this is one of those groups. We see in this group, so let me just make this visible first in the app so that we can explore what's going on. So I click that information icon. So the first thing I have is another icon for a close icon. So this is what I'm going to use to exit out of the dialogue. Then I have an image control. So this is just an image that I'm pulling from a SharePoint list. So I'm going to store that here in the dialog. And then you notice I have a rectangle control. So if we go to insert and icons again, there's a rectangle object. So all I'm doing is I'm overlaying a rectangle that's going to take up the full height and width of the screen. So you have this kind of shadow effect. And all I did once I have that rectangle on there is I went into the color. So if we look at the properties pane on the right-hand side, we can click the color bucket here and go to custom. And when we go to custom, we can see we have the ability to change the opacity. So this is the color of itself. So I kind of went to like a medium gray. And then down here, I can adjust the opacity of that. So as I scale it down, we can start seeing what's behind it a little bit more clear. So this just kind of shows, and what you see typically when you go to any website and you see like a pop-up box is what they do is they kind of just have an overlay and kind of mute out what's behind it. So you can adjust the opacity easily that way. So that's all I did there, and I made sure that I've put this in the group itself as the bottom item so that the image shows over it and the icon shows over it. To group items, you just select them in the tree view here and hold down the shift key. So they both show, and then you can click the three dots and select group, right? So that's all I did with these 3 items as I put those on there. Now, how did I actually make it show and hide when I click that button? That is done using variables. So take a look at this close icon. You see I'm doing an update context. That's called a context variable. Context variables apply just to the screen that you're in. So I'm setting a context variable called showMap, and I'm saying whatever this value was, this would be a Boolean value, true or false. So if it was true before, set it to the opposite of whatever that was. That's what this exclamation point in your variable name means. It means it's just going to switch that to the opposite of what it was before. Right? So when I click that, that's going to set that update context to false. But when I click this, it's doing the same thing. We're using that same update context, setting show map to the opposite of what it was. Now, as you can probably imagine, if I click on this group itself, we have a visible property if we go to the dropdown and scroll down to visible. So I'm setting that visible property to that variable. So now, since that's a true or false, when I click on this little information icon, that's true, so the visibility shows. And then when I click the X, it's false, so it hides. So very simple concept to create pop-up boxes. And that's just another way to, again, reduce the information on your screen. I could have embedded like a small map on here, but that would have cluttered it up. So I just used a little pop-up dialog instead. Okay, and this right here, I'm using, I said, the HTML control in this one as well. And it's just a very simple use case for kind of the background here. Sorry, I'm blind and I'm trying to find it. Here we go. It says background rounded to. So this is just an HTML control with a simple background and a border radius and a background color, right? So just another way if you want kind of like rounded corners or whatever you're trying to do, that you can have this simple HTML control in there. And the design for this, like I said, I like to copy things that I already use. I have the Massage Envy app on my phone, and I just looked at what they were doing from a design standpoint, and I copied it for this desk booking application. Okay, so let's switch back to the presentation real quick. Cover a few more concepts here. So we talked about the HTML control. Yep. Okay, here we go. We already talked about that. Next one I want to cover, which you might have saw in one of the apps I was showing, is SVGs. This is another great way to add nice visuals and functionality into your applications. And there's multiple use cases for SVGs in your apps. So one, the icons that we get in Power Apps, there's a set limit of that. So if you want something, one of the easiest ways to make your Power Apps not look like they're an actual Power App and a real app is to use external icons rather than the icons that are given in Power Apps. Because since there's just such a select few amount of icons within Power Apps itself, it's kind of a dead giveaway that the app you're looking at is a Power App when you're using those. So there's great resources out there to use SVGs as icons in your applications. So that's one, and we'll take a look at that. But another great one is what you're seeing here on the screen. We can use SVGs in an interactive manner. And if you're not familiar what an SVG is, let me explain that real quickly. It's just a fancy image file where we have the ability to edit the code behind the image so that we can do things like what we're seeing here and have interactive images. So we could do things as crazy as what you're seeing right here with the images in the countries. So we can select a different country and it highlights that on an SVG map. You can actually get this by going to mapssvg.com. They have different SVG images of various countries and maps. Or you can do something interactive and cool and simple like this with this little donut. So you can see as we move the slider below, the value in the filling of the donut changes, right? So to demonstrate that, let's switch back to Power Apps. And I'll go back to that other application we were looking at here. Oops. All right, computer's freaking out on me. So let's take a look at this example first. So let me clean up my screen here just a bit. So this is that example we were looking at, to where if I play this, as I move my slider down, the fill of this is going to change. And this is all done with an SVG. Now, this is a little bit unique because I'm using something called a component, but don't get bogged down on that quite yet. I'll explain components in a little bit later. But to inject SVGs inside of your apps, all you have to do is add an image control. So you can go to Insert, Media, and Image. And instead of pointing this to an actual image, say that you have stored here in the app itself, you're going to put in SVG code. So you'll download your SVG from wherever you're getting it from, and you'll open it in a text editor, and you'll get all of this long code from it. So you'll just copy what's ever in that, and you'll put that here in this image property in Power Apps. The only important thing that you have to do is right here. So you'll have your SVG image itself, but you need to append it with this data : image whack SVG, right? And then you'll paste that below here. Now, don't get too bogged down on what's going on here, because the good thing about this is a component that is available to you to download for free on the Power Users Community Component Sample Gallery. So you don't have to worry about all this math that's going on here and how to tweak this. So you can see how complicated it can get. This is just like math that's determining how to fill in this SVG with the different colors. To use this, since this is a component, all we have to do is add this into our app and tell this little SVG itself component, well, what's the max value that you want to have for this? And what is the actual current value of it? Now, for the current value, you see we have that set to whatever our slider value is. Now, this could be something from your data source, or whatever it might be, or it could be hard-coded. But you just set that value to that, and the SVG can read what that is against what the max value is, so that as you slide that, it automatically dynamically fills that in. So a great way to make your apps more visually appealing. Another way that I'm using that, let me quickly open my vacation time away application. You saw the screenshot of this one a little bit early on in the presentation here. But when you're wanting to show how many vacation days that you have available, you could have that in a visual representation, is what we're seeing here, where it's all filled in pink if you have all your remaining days, and as you start using them, it grays out a bit, right? So just another way that we're able to use SVGs in our apps. Okay, we'll go back to the slides. All right, next, now we're going to get into some really kind of focused tips here. Whoops, a little bit too far. Galleries instead of drop-downs. So this is a pretty cool one here. Now, there are times when you're building out a form or an application where you might need a drop-down selection of items, right? So it might be like a list of products. You might have shirts, dresses, skirts, and pants, right? Now, you could have that as a drop-down, but one way to really improve your UI is by, make it more intuitive, is to reduce clicks. So now your user has to click on the drop-down, then select the item. In instances where you have a pretty small amount of options in the drop-down, say like in this scenario when I only have 4, that's a great use case to leverage a gallery instead of a drop-down and make those clickable buttons. So that reduces clicks and it makes it a little bit more visually appealing. So again, let's go back over to the demo and we'll take a look at that. Okay. So go back to this app and we'll switch screens here. All right, so that's what I'm doing on this particular screen. So now you see, here's an example of the dropdown. So I went to insert, input, and dropdown. And I've just hard-coded some values in this instance. And that's fine. They can click that and select their item there. But instead, I've used a gallery approach, which is what we're seeing here. So as I click on one of these, like pants, it's highlighted in purple and all the other ones are grayed out. So I know which one I selected, right? So that's just a really simple concept of going to insert gallery and choosing a gallery type of your choice. And just what I did is I utilized buttons. So you can use buttons, HTML control, whatever your needs are. So you can go in the gallery and insert a button, which is what I did. And then you can just get the fill. So we can go to selected fill or pressed fill. So if it's pressed, we can change the fill to a different color to know that that's the selected item, right? So it's as simple as that. And we can get the value of that like when you're submitting your form. So let's just add a submit button here. So rather than pointing that to your dropdown, you would just say get gallery products dot selected a value instead of just pointing it to the dropdown value. So it's just a little nice effect that you can add there. One other thing that I'll point out since I'm in here that you might have noticed, this is just like an often forgotten feature I think of that you can do in Power Apps. If you do want to use dropdowns, so if you have quite a few items in there, one thing that you can do to make your dropdowns look a little bit nicer is add emojis in there. Or so you can use is it the Windows key plus I think to get your kind of emoji window up there. So all you have to do is what I've did here in the dropdown. So you can do Windows key plus. Whoops, that just zoomed in way too much. But then it'll show your emoji key and you can put that in there. If you're not on a Windows device, there's websites where you can go to see, get those to get a list of emojis to put in there. So you just paste the Unicode format there in there and you can have these quick visuals inside of your applications. And so this could be either in a drop down, it could be, in labels, anywhere throughout your Power App, you can have and add those visual effects, which is pretty cool. All right. All right, so we talked about drop downs. The other one, quick tip here, is smart input. So this might seem, like a little nitpicky, but there's something called virtual keyboard mode. So if I kind of play this, you'll see we have a product field, which is obviously is going to be text, right? But for quantity, that's going to be a number value. And you see as I use this Power App on my phone that it popped up the numeric keyboard. Now, if you built a Power App, you might have not got that numeric keyboard, though. You might have got, for a number field, this text keyboard instead. That's because of a setting that we need to configure in the Power App itself. And again, this might seem like a small thing, but it's kind of frustrating for users, especially those out in the field when they know that this should be a number like a quantity or a price that we have to do. And I have to go in and click and change the keyboard to numeric. So let's switch back over to the demo again, and we'll see how to enable that feature, because by default it is turned on to auto, which doesn't always capture that the type of input that you have correctly. All right, so let's go in here. So in this particular app, let's just scroll some of this down. So we have a quantity field. So obviously this would be a number. So all we have to do to make sure that it pops up that numeric keypad is click on the drop down here, scroll down, and go to virtual keyboard mode here. Now by default, this is set, like I said, to auto. And that doesn't know that this is supposed to be a number field. So you can change that to numeric so that when you're using this on a tablet or a phone device, it's going to pop open the numeric keyboard instead. Right? Okay. And getting close on time, so I'm going to scroll through some of these a little bit more quickly. This is a new one that I wanted to point out, and I'm just really going to leave some documentation for this that you can check out. But I don't know if any of you that are watching have tried to build responsive Power Apps at all. But traditionally you would choose, am I optimizing this when you first create the app for tablet, desktop, or phone? And it would kind of adjust the screen size and format to that. You could do responsive, meaning that it scales according to the device that you're on, but it was very formula based. You had to do a lot of logic and add that into your apps to do that. Well, as of just a couple weeks ago now, they released these new responsive screens for Power Apps that makes that even easier. So you can add in a container control, put in your elements as you see here inside of the container, and whatever's in that container will automatically respond based on the device and the form factor you're on. So it's really going to make building responsive applications even easier, which is going to in turn make your apps more beautiful and intuitive. Right. So there's a link to some documentation out there that talks a little bit more about these responsive templates. And so they're components or responsive screens that you can use. And if you've leveraged and used Microsoft Dataverse or Teams at all of those app samples, and when you build apps in there, they're automatically responsive out of the box, thanks to leveraging these new responsive containers. Okay, next tip. I kind of briefly mentioned this, but keep it consistent. So consistency is key in a nice intuitive application. And one way that Power Apps gives us to keep things consistent is components. And all a component is a reusable building block that defines a set of controls. You can import these into other apps. So, we already have things like text box and galleries that we can use, right? Well, we can build our own custom components. So these are good use cases that are going to help you give, reusability, consistency, better performance, and collaborative development. So instances that you might use this is for common things that you're repeating across several screens in your app, or maybe different applications. So going back to that desk booking application I showed you, notice I had that footer on every single screen to navigate back and forth. That was a component, and that's a great use case for a component. So headers, footers, navigation items, dialogues like we looked at can be utilized as a component so that you build it once as a component. You can just change certain features, and if you change it at the component level, it gets pushed down to everywhere that you're using it. So you don't have to touch like 50 different screens and update it when you need a change. And the way that we can make these components reusable is with these component properties that it gives us. So we can have input properties, meaning we can send information to the components, like we want the header of the component, this to be this color, or we want this text to show up there. And we have output components, meaning if we had a component like I showed with the footer of that application, where we might need to know which item is selected in there, we can pass that back to our screens as an output component. And I'll show you that here in a second. The other big thing as far as making apps intuitive and visually appealing is to make sure that you have a consistent brand. And we can do this several ways. First, obviously, you want to know what is your company brand standard, and get your logos and your official colors and all of that. So we can do what's called a branding screen approach, where we create another screen, a hidden screen in our Power App, where we put all of our company colors in there and fonts and all of that. And we reference that via variables that we can use inside of the different elements in our app. Another way, though, is with the Power Platform Center of Excellence. They have these theming components that we can utilize and install for free as well, that allows us to create our own custom themes to use in our apps. We can also even do custom fonts. This is something that we've been able to do all along, but you just might not have realized it. Because when you go in and to say a label control and you click on the font, we have this drop down, right, of like say 5 to 10 or 10 to 12 different fonts we can choose from. And you might think that we can only choose from those particular fonts, but we actually have the ability, just by going into the font property, to type in our own custom font. So I'm going to walk you through that here in a second. All right. So for the custom, let's start with the custom font, because that's one of the easiest. So what I was talking about is we have this label control here. So you want to change the font. So you might go to the properties pane, click the drop down, and think that the list that we're seeing here is the only choices that we have. But we can overwrite that simply by going to the properties pane up here in the left-hand side, finding the font property, not font, wait, font, and replacing what we see here, so font dot, with just whatever the name of the font is we want to use in quotes. So the one I was showing up there is Magneto. So we can just type in the name of that and you see it instantly updates. Now, obviously the font has to be available on your computer and your on your browser there. So that's why you want to make sure, just like if you were designing like a regular application for that matter, that you have a backup web safe font as well. So we can do that here in Power Apps too by just, so we have, this is what we want our primary font to be. But if that's not available for our other users, we can do a comma and say use Arial instead as our fallback font, right? So just another thing, simple trick that you can do to have custom fonts just by manually typing in the name there. And I'm going to open a different app to show the branding screen approach. Well, first, actually, let's go to a different environment because I want to show the theming component because I think that's a really powerful way of creating custom themes and making it match across all your apps. So I'm not going to go into the details of how we install the Center of Excellence, but when you do, you get these two applications available to you. You have this theme gallery and theme editor. So let's look at the theme gallery here. So this is where your end user can go and they can see themes that you have curated for your environment. So you can see all of the different themes. It's being a little bit slow for me. And then we can create custom ones. So if I go into the theme editor, you see I have the ability to add a new theme. So it's a Power App that's enabling us to create and manage themes for all the apps to use. And kind of how it works is, you see we're going to have the theme builder here so we can give our theme a name. So I might create an M365 theme. And we can change different properties and colors, and it's going to give us a real-time preview on the right of what this theme is going to look like, right? So we can change like the font size and things like that. And then when we're ready, we can just go to settings and we can save this. And it's going to save this theme into our theme gallery. So there's my M365 theme. So now a user could go into that theme gallery and see the M365 theme there. And now if they want to use it, they can just go to View, and they can download that app template and open it within Power Apps. And now they have an app that has that theme preloaded, right? So that's a way for if you want all of your controls to automatically have a particular theme in there, that's a great way to do that. There's another approach for a branding screen, which I won't take the time to go over today because we're running low on time, and I do have a video about how to do that on my YouTube that you can reference there. Okay, so just a couple more things that I'll talk about at a very high level as far as performance. Be mindful of the loading process of Power Apps because that's going to help you understand better, what are things that are affecting the performance of my application. So things that are going to get you into trouble as far as the loading process here are too many data sources because you have to retrieve all of the data sources in your app when it's initially loaded. Too much bloated, complicated logic in the on-start, and screen dependencies / too many controls on a screen. So all of that has to happen before your app is initially loaded. So those are some areas that can get you into a little bit of trouble. So things you want to do from a performance perspective, you want to reduce, you want to reuse, and you want to recycle. So looking at controls first, we want to keep the total number of controls in our application under 500. If we start going beyond that, your app's going to really affect and be slow performing. So controls are anything, they're labels, they're text boxes, they're icons. So try to limit that and reduce your complex control types as well, like your PDF viewer, because those controls are a little bit more bloated than some of the other controls. We can't neglect images. We want to make sure we reduce the amount of images and the size. So very important to run your images through some kind of compression tool like compressor.io to make sure that they're optimized so you don't get that dreaded slow loading image in your application. From a data perspective, also, we want to reduce the number of data connectors in our app. So ideally under 30. So you'd be surprised how quickly you can reach a lot of data connectors in an app. I worked on one project that I was brought in on that had over 500 different data connections. Needless to say, that was pretty slow. One way you want to limit sequential data actions. And really what that means is when you load information, say from a data source in your app with formulas, it has to, by default, load sequentially, meaning take this example with products. So it's going to have to go and load the product list first from, like, say, SharePoint. It has to wait for that to completely finish before it moves on to load the customer list. That has to finish, so on and so forth. So you can see the total time is quite lengthy. A trick you can do is use a function called concurrent. Wrap all of your calls in that so that they run at the exact same time, saving you in performance. I want to point out this really, really helpful formula. You can get into a situation where you might need to do multiple lookups. So in this scenario, we have an appointments list, and our data source has a first name field and a last name field. It doesn't have a field for full name. We want to populate a dropdown or a label in our Power App with the first and last name all concatenated. Well, normally before this new function, that would be 2 lookup calls we have to do. That's 2 calls to the data source. Instead, now we can use this function called with, wrap that call in a with, and just do a lookup once. And now we can get the first name and last name all in one call. And there's great documentation on with and how to use it. Another newish great function is the sequence. So sequence allows us to generate a range of numbers with a single function, which helps eliminate the need for hard-coded values. So you might notice in my desk reservation app, I was using that to get time slots. So rather than hard coding, 12 a.m. all the way to 12 p.m., whatever it might be, you can use the sequence function to randomly generate the different hours in the day or days in a week or whatever it might be. And again, there's good documentation out there on that. So we want to reduce screen references. This is the big takeaway for this slide. So one of the things that we can do is get into a use case where we have dependencies on different screens. So think of the case of you have a gallery on one screen and you're using the selected value of that gallery to filter another gallery on the second screen. If you point it directly to the selected item of the gallery, that's a screen dependency, meaning 2 of those screens have to load when the app is initially loaded. That can help and hurt performance. Okay, I'm going to kind of skip through this because it's kind of like the same thing, using components, and leave you here with some additional resources as far as if you want those app samples. Again, this is a great resource out there, free on the Power Users community, to get tons of app samples and component samples as well. So that SVG component I showed you, that footer component I showed you, those are all available to download for free on the community forum. Loading.io is a good website to get free GIFs and SVGs. And there's a few resources as far as an accessibility standpoint for contrast checking and color blindness. And I have some app samples as well. So all the apps I believe that I showed you today, like the desk reservation, the time off, and all of that, I have available to download for free on my GitHub as samples, so that you can use those and kind of see some of the patterns that I did there. Okay, so with that, I want to see if there's any questions in the chat here. We have a few minutes left. Let's see. Cool, so no questions. So yeah, if that's it, I'll just leave this resources slide up for you to see. What is the URL for the SVG maps? Okay, yeah, I'll paste some links to the resources there. That's that one for the URL for the SVGs. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much again for sticking around and for watching. I hope it was helpful. Sorry, time got a little bit away from me there. I was on a roll. Never enough time. But again, a lot of this stuff is on my YouTube channel too, so you can reference some of these concepts and ideas that I talked about. So thank you for joining. Really appreciate it.